All right, factoring. Here's what factoring is. Let's say I have these two binomials because each of them have two pieces. If I expanded that out, by what method do you use to multiply those two out?
Foil.
Foil. Look at you, Hampton. See? All right, so we're going to it does. I don't use foil a whole lot, the terminology foil, because when these are not binomials, that doesn't work. I just generally use distribute, but y'all learned it as foil. So when I foil or multiply or distribute, I take the first term and it has to hit everything in the second set of parentheses. So what is x times 2x?
2x squared.
2x squared. What is x times negative 1?
Negative x.
Negative x. What is, oh, we're done with that one.
Now go on to 3.
Now to go on to the 3. 3 times 2x is?
6x.
And 3 times negative 1 is?
Negative 3.
Get your like terms together and you have? Oh. Okay, so I do all that and I ran through it kind of quick because that's not factoring, okay? Factoring is when we start with this one and we make it look like this one. Okay? It's so much fun.
Why would it be plus 3?
Because it's positive times negative. Okay? So we're doing the backwards of foiling, if that makes sense. Okay. Now here's the backbone of factoring. The backbone. That's right. Okay. Greatest common factor. If you can find a greatest common factor, you can factor any trinomial, any quadratic. Okay. So the question is, what is a greatest common factor? Let's say I have, and we did this, you did this on your last test. Some of us did this on our last test. If we have 4x to the third plus 6x squared, and I want to take out the greatest common factor. So remember, this is a basic form of factoring. I'm going to backwards distribute. Yeah.
No.
Okay, that's part of it. 2x squared, right? We're looking for the biggest number that we can divide both of the coefficients by, right? And we want to take away the most number of x's that you can. So yes, you are right. It is 2x squared. But my question is, when you take that away, what's left? 2x plus 3. Okay? So you got to divide here because you got to think, whenever I distribute this back through, I got to end up with what I started. Does anybody have trouble finding a GCF? Because I'll spend a little more time on it if I need to. Don't be scared. Everybody okay? Okay. Let me ask you this then. Let's see if you really can. No. That's just an example. What's the GCF? Does it have a GCF? It's 2. If you factor out the GCF, what does it look like? 6x squared plus 7x plus 2. Why didn't you take an x out? The last one didn't have one to give. Okay, you got to take it away from everybody. Make sense? So let's keep this same example rolling. You can't take an x out because the 2 doesn't have an x, so you just leave them. When I first talked about quadratics yesterday, I talked about an a, b, and a c. Remember that? ax squared plus bx plus c. In this in this expression, what is a? What is b? And what is c? Okay. You have a sheet here. I'm going to run through. This is actually the example that's listed at the top. Okay. Your first step, which is written there for you when you go to factor, is always factor out a GCF if you have one. Okay. We had one, so we took it out. Everybody with me? All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to factor this. I've listed out my A, my B, and my C, and if you don't know how to factor or don't remember how to factor, then it might be handy for you to write it off to the side. It'll really help if you do. All right, your next step, so that was step 2, list out A, B, and C. Step 3, multiply A and C together. Well, A times C is 12. Do we agree? Okay. Here's what I want to do. I want to find 2 numbers, any 2 numbers in the whole wide world that multiply to 12, but they have to add
4 and 3.
to 7. 4 and 3, right? Did you look or you just knew?
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
4 and 3, right? Are we all in agreement? 4 plus 3 is 7. 4 times 3 is 12, okay? Whatever method you have used to factor in the past, this is a step you cannot get away from in any method, is multiplying these 2 together and finding those 2 that multiply and add. Here's what I'm going to do. Instead of writing 7x, I'm going to write 4x plus 3x. Do we all agree that that is the same thing? Yes? So now what I'm going to do, I call this slashing. I don't know if this is written on there. I slash it in half. Okay? That's right. And what I'm going to do, ignore that 2 for right now. It's still going to be part of the answer in the end, okay? But look at the first 2 terms. What's the GCF there? 2x. Take it out, and what's left?
3x plus 2.
The middle sign stays in your problem. Now, look at the second 2. What's the GCF? 1. There's not 1. You can always use 1 if it doesn't have 1. What's left if you take out a 1? Everybody with me? All right, this 2 is still sitting on the outside. I'm just going to keep carrying it down as I work. Now, what do you notice that they have in common? 3x plus 2. Here's what you do. Here's where the magic happens. You take this, you write it 1 time. You're basically taking that out as a GCF. And then you write what's left. What's left? 2x plus 1. That 2 is still there on the outside, so there it is factored down. If you can GCF, you can factor. GCF. All right, let's try another one because sometimes, and there's some tips down in the bottom, sometimes some scenarios happen, of course, that throw us for a little bit of a loop. You won't always have a GCF in the beginning. And sometimes these signs might be a little different. So there are 4 on the back that we're going to work through together that run through every scenario. It's always easier if your very first number is a 1 instead of something else, but you can do it. With this method, you can do it anytime. All right, let's look at the first one. The first one is x squared plus 6x plus 5. And remember, your steps are written for you on this paper. I'll post this on Classroom for you, too. What's my first step?
A. Sort the A, B, and C out.
Okay, but first look for GCF. In this case, it doesn't have one, right? So, yes, I can go ahead and sort my A, my B, and my C. What are they? A is... Anybody confused? Do y'all remember this? Is it coming back to you or not really? Okay. Multiply A and C together. 1 and 5. You're exactly right. 1 and 5 equals 6. So I'm going to rewrite this 6 using 1 and 5 instead. So it's going to be x squared It does not matter what order you put them in. Slash it. Yes.
Because you said it don't matter what you put it in. But it was like, I just thought about this, like say if the X didn't have like a number with it, when it didn't matter. Because you want to pair it up with something that like.
Well, what I mean by order is these two, you could write plus 5x plus 1x or plus 1x plus 5x.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm saying. Like, say if there was like, one of them was like an even number or whatever, and it was like 4x squared, and it was a 2, like or something, but you want to put the 2 with the 4, like that. Because I did that like last year.
You'll have to show me what you're talking about.
I was
Okay. All right, first two, what's the GCF here? X, that's right. What's left? You always keep the middle sign, and as long as it's a plus, it's smooth sailing. We're going to look at one that's not a plus and what happens. What can you take out of the second two? What's left? If you go through this process and you do not have two parentheses that match, you've done something wrong, okay? If you can find these two numbers, it will factor. Now, it could be that you don't have those two numbers, okay? It could be that it's not factorable, and that's okay. But if you found those two numbers, it can be factored, so these better match up. All right. Pull that one out.
X plus 1 plus 6, X plus 5.
This is going a little better, surprisingly, than I thought, so I'm worried. Yeah. Yeah, if you learn the box, you can use the box, sure. Who'd you have for Algebra 2?
I haven't.
Did she do the box? I used to do the box all the time. So the box would be, is it like that?
No.
There's 2 lines.
Yeah, and then you
Oh,
bring
I
it.
don't know how to do that
You
one.
do.
It's like.
Hold on, let me. All right, let's look at number 2 together. This one gets a little bit harder because your signs. This is where if you're using a different method. You got me what? You know how to do it? If you're using a different method, this is where it starts getting tricky because sometimes you have to memorize what signs go with what. If you start out with this, you end up with these signs. If you start out with this, this is what the signs look like. So anyway, grouping, you really don't have to remember what the signs are going to look like because it's going to do it for you. So GCF, do I have one? No. Okay. Now, A, B, and C.
A is 1, B is -4, C is -12. Multiply that.
Okay. -12. Now here's where it's crazy. It's got to multiply to -12, but add to what? -4.
-6 and 2.
Oh, look at y'all go. -6 and 2. Thomas. Okay, -6 and 2. Now, depending on how you write this is going to depend on how hard it starts to make it with one of each.
See, that's what I said.
Okay.
If I would have put in there, I would put -6.
I would put the negative first. I always start with the negative and make your life easier in the end, okay? But it's not wrong if you start with the 2. That's the nice thing about grouping. So I'll do it both ways for you and show you what happens, and then we'll move on. All right, so I'm going to rewrite -4 as -6 and +2. And I'm going to go and slash it. GCF of the first two terms would be X, and what is left?
X minus 6.
How about GCF, keep that middle sign. GCF of the second two? What's left?
X 6.
Yep. Take the X minus 6 out, and it leaves me with X plus 2. And if you FOIL that out, I promise you, you will come back to what you started with. Now, you don't have to write this if you don't want to, but just to show you what would happen, if I'd done x squared plus 2x minus 6x minus 12. So let's say I just flopped them around. When I slash it, my GCF on the first two is still x. Here's where it starts getting sticky. Remember, we have to keep that middle sign, right? When the middle sign is negative, and you might want to write this on the front of your paper or somewhere. When the middle sign is negative, it changes this last sign. And here's why. What you're factoring out is actually a negative number. So when I factor this 6 out, I'm really dividing each of these by negative 6. So it would leave me with x plus 2. It changes the last sign. I'll put you a little note here. When middle okay, and the reason for that is we're factoring out a negative number if we put a negative. So here you would be, if you were redistributing, you would be distributing a negative 6, not a positive 6. But at the end of the day, whenever I'm finished, I have x plus 2, x minus 6, which is exactly what I had here. It's just written in a different order, but because multiplication is what? Starts with C. Commutative. Because it's commutative, I can do it in any order. It's not crazy. Jackson is commutative. All right, let's move on to number 3. 2 more to go and I'll be done. Yeah. All right, this one looks a little bit different. So my first step is still GCF. Does it have one? Yes. What's the GCF here? 4. When I take that out, what is left? 9. Everybody with me? Why is this one different? It doesn't have a B, right? It's missing a B. So just so you can see, this is the same thing as x squared plus 0x minus 9. Now, if you remember special patterns from Algebra 2, and you know this is a difference of 2 squares, and you can factor it without going through the process, you are more than welcome to. However, just to show you that everything will still group, we're going to run through grouping it real quick. Okay? What is A? What is B? And C? Only look right there on the inside. All right, what multiplies to negative 9 but adds to 0? That's exactly right, 3 and negative 3. If you ever have 0 in the middle, you're going to look for the same number, one positive, one negative. Okay? I'm going to do the negative first, because that's what Jerome likes to do, right? Because then I don't have to worry about changing signs, okay? Slash it. What can you take out of the first 2? What's left? First sign. What can you take out of the second 2? What's left? 1x minus. That's exactly right. The x minus 3 is what they have in common. So I take that out and I'm left with. Remember that pattern, difference of 2 squares? If they're both perfect squares with a minus in the middle, you do the square root of each one, 1 plus 1 minus. It just, if you ever take a GCF out in the beginning, it just follows it all the way down. Una más. Number 4. You can take out 2. That's exactly right. Did you say wait? Y'all jumped ahead of me on the GCF there. That's okay. Try to factor this one on your own and see what happens. What's your A? 1. What's B? And what's C? This one was a little bit trickier because they have to multiply to a positive but add to a negative, which means I need two negatives. Negative, yeah, that's right. So it doesn't matter which one goes first, they're both negative here. But they do still add to -7, which is good. What's your GCF of the first two? What's left? Keep the middle sign. What's the GCF? 6. What happens because that middle is negative? So what's left in parentheses? X minus 1. That's exactly right. X minus 1 is my common factor there. So it's X minus 1. And what's left? And you're done. Things before I set you loose. If you ever see, I think I put this on the front of this paper. Maybe not. If you ever see a negative in the beginning of your equation, okay, for instance, like number 17, I think is the only one this happens on. So if you start out with something like this, always, always, always factor out a negative before you start, okay? So always let your GCF be -1 and change all the signs inside because you don't want to factor with a negative out front. It's just messy, nasty business, okay? So if you ever start with it, and you might want to put that on your tips or somewhere if you need to, but just as a reminder, that won't happen often, but it does happen sometimes. Okay, on your homework, we're 1 through 18. The hardest part about this is going to be finding your two numbers, your two factors. Everybody good?